Hey guys, welcome back to The Readers. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People's Story. I own about 5 acres of land just outside the suburbs. It's been in my family for generations, and 3 years ago I decided to turn part of it into a small, organic plant nursery. Nothing massive, just enough to supplement my income and share my passion for sustainable growing with the community. The rest of the property is a mix of my modest house, a barn I converted into a workshop, and about 3 acres of beautiful open field that I maintain meticulously. That field isn't just empty space. Last year, I invested nearly $15,000 in an underground irrigation system specifically designed for the heirloom varieties I wanted to start growing this season. The soil had been specially amended and prepared. It was a major investment, but one that would pay off when I expanded my business. My property borders a suburban development that went up about 10 years ago. Most of my neighbors are decent folks who respect boundaries, except for one. Let's call her Karen. She moved in about 2 years ago and almost immediately started making small requests that crossed lines. Can I cut through your property to get to the lake faster? Would you mind if my kids played in your field sometimes? Could you not work so early on weekends? The equipment wakes us up. I'm generally accommodating, so I'd compromise where reasonable. But I always made sure to be clear about boundaries. Yes, her kids could play occasionally if they stayed away from my nursery. No, she couldn't create a permanent path through my property. And sorry, but my work schedule was non-negotiable during growing season. Things were tense but manageable until last month. I had gone away for a long weekend to visit my brother. It was the first break I'd taken in months, and I was looking forward to the downtime. When I pulled into my driveway around 7 p.m. on Sunday, something immediately felt wrong. There were tire tracks leading into my field. Not just one or two, but dozens of them, crisscrossing the entire area. I parked and walked toward the field, my stomach dropping with each step. What I saw made me physically ill. Approximately 50 cars were parked across my carefully maintained field. The ground was compacted and rutted from tires. Empty cups, paper plates, and various pieces of trash dotted the landscape. Several areas of my irrigation system had been crushed or damaged where heavy vehicles had driven over the more delicate components. I stood there in shock, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the banners tied to several trees at the edge of my property. Happy 16th birthday, Ashley, alongside some deflating balloons. As I walked through the field assessing the damage, I found more disturbing evidence. Professional catering trays, a cash box receipt that had blown into my hedges, and a stack of what appeared to be parking validation tickets with $10 written on them. That's when the pieces clicked together. Karen hadn't just allowed people to park on my property, she had charged them for it. I pulled out my phone and started documenting everything. The cars, the damage, the trash, the receipts, all of it. Then I marched over to Karen's house, my blood boiling but my mind clear. I needed to handle this right. As I approached, I could see her backyard was still filled with party decorations and cleanup in progress. About a dozen teenagers were helping break down tables while Karen directed operations with a drink in hand. "Excuse me," I said as I entered her yard, trying to keep my voice level. "We need to talk about all those cars parked on my field." Karen turned, barely acknowledging me. "Oh, it's you? Yeah, we had a little space issue with Ashley's party. Hope you don't mind." "Actually, I do mind. You parked 50 cars on my private property without permission." She waved dismissively. "It's just grass. It'll grow back. Besides, nobody uses that field anyway." "That's not the point. That's my property. You needed to ask permission, which I likely wouldn't have given because I just installed an irrigation system that's now damaged." Karen rolled her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. If anything, we did you a favor. All those cars flattened the weeds. Free maintenance." She laughed and took a sip of her drink. I took a deep breath. "I also found these." I held up the parking validation tickets. "Were you charging people to park on my land?" Her face changed slightly, but she recovered quickly. "Well, parking was included in the party fee. It's standard for events." "Events? So this was a commercial enterprise? Did you have permits for that?" That question clearly hit a nerve. Karen's husband, who had been hanging back during our conversation, suddenly looked uncomfortable. "Look," he interjected, "it was just a birthday party that got a bit bigger than expected." "A bit bigger?" I scrolled through my phone and showed him a social media post I'd found with Karen tagged. It was an advertisement for Ashley's Sweet 16 extravaganza, promising professional catering, entertainment, and ample private parking for a $75 attendance fee. His face fell. "Karen, you said this was just family and close friends." "Don't start," she snapped at him before turning back to me. Look, what's done is done. Your field will be fine in a week. Let's not make mountains out of molehills. I need all these cars off my property immediately, I said firmly. And we need to discuss compensation for the damage. Compensation? She laughed incredulously. For what? Some flattened grass? Get real. I looked at her directly. I'll be in touch tomorrow after I've had a full chance to assess the damage. Please make sure everyone moves their vehicles tonight. As I walked away, I heard her mutter, "Good luck with that." That night, I couldn't sleep. I was furious. But I knew acting purely on emotion would get me nowhere. I had a major soil delivery coming in 5 days that needed to go exactly where those cars had compacted the ground. The timing couldn't have been worse. First thing Monday morning, I called my friend who works as a property lawyer. After explaining the situation, she laid out my options and advised me on next steps. Document everything, she said. Take detailed photos of all damage, get estimates for repairs, and don't engage in further unwitnessed conversations with her. By afternoon, I had placed large no trespassing and private property signs along the entire border between our properties. For the few cars still parked in my field, I placed detailed notices on their windshields explaining the trespass and giving them 24 hours to remove their vehicles before they would be towed at owner's expense. Then I got to work creating a comprehensive invoice. I contacted the irrigation company that had installed my system to assess the damage. I researched comparable rates for event venue parking in our area. I calculated the cost of soil remediation for compacted ground, and I added reasonable administrative fees for my time and trouble. The total came to just under $7,000. My lawyer friend reviewed the invoice and helped me draft a letter to Karen outlining 2 options. Pay the invoice in full within 14 days. I would report the unpermitted commercial event to authorities, zoning, business licensing, health department for the catering, etc., and file a civil suit for damages. I delivered the letter and invoice by certified mail so she couldn't claim she never received it. Karen's response came swiftly. She showed up at my door that evening, waving the papers and practically screaming, "Is this some kind of joke? $7,000 for using an empty field? You're insane." I remained calm. That invoice covers actual damages and reasonable compensation for unauthorized commercial use of private property. You ran a business event charging admission and parking fees on land you don't own without permission. It was a birthday party that you charged people to attend and park at. You advertised it as an extravaganza with a per-person fee. That makes it a commercial event. I'm not paying this, she declared. And if you try to push this, I'll countersue for harassment. I shrugged. That's your choice. Option 2 is outlined in the letter. You have 14 days to decide. She stormed off, and I closed my door, my heart racing but my resolve firm. The next day, I noticed something interesting. Several neighbors approached me while I was working in my nursery. Apparently, word had spread about the incident, and they had stories of their own about Karen's entitled behavior, from blocking driveways during her other events to complaining to authorities about minor code violations when neighbors wouldn't accommodate her requests. I wasn't the only one who'd had enough of Karen. On day 3, I submitted reports to the relevant local agencies about the unpermitted commercial event. I provided copies of the social media advertisements, photos of the parking tickets, and statements from neighbors who had attended and confirmed they paid for entry and parking. Things moved faster than I expected. By the end of the week, Karen had received visits from the zoning enforcement officer, the business licensing department, and the health department. Each came with citations and potential fines that, when combined, far exceeded my invoice amount. The turning point came when one of the teenagers who attended the party posted on social media about the parking situation drama. Apparently, Karen had explicitly told guests that she had arranged private parking and that the fee was going to the property owner. This post was shared widely in our community groups, and Karen's reputation took a serious hit. 10 days after receiving my invoice, Karen's husband showed up at my door alone. "I want to resolve this," he said quietly. Well, she's not being reasonable, but I am. Those citations are adding up, and this could get expensive fast." We sat on my porch and talked through the situation like adults. He admitted they had been wrong and apologized sincerely. We negotiated a payment plan that would cover my damages over 3 months, plus an additional $1,000 for my trouble. In return, I agreed not to pursue further legal action. "I appreciate you being reasonable about this," he said as he left, "and I'm sorry it had to come to this point." 2 days later, I received the first payment as agreed. The irrigation company came out to repair the damaged system. I hired a soil specialist to help remediate the compacted areas before my delivery arrived. Word continued to spread through the neighborhood. Karen's event planning social media page, which I hadn't even known existed before this incident, was flooded with negative reviews referencing the parking situation. It disappeared entirely within weeks. The most satisfying moment came about a month later. I was working in my nursery when a teenage girl approached cautiously from Karen's house. "Are you the owner?" she asked. I nodded. I'm really sorry about my party. I didn't know my mom didn't ask permission to use your field. That wasn't cool." It was Ashley, Karen's daughter. Her sincerity was touching. "I appreciate that," I told her. "It takes maturity to apologize for something that wasn't entirely your fault." She smiled sadly. "Yeah, well, we're moving soon anyway. Dad got a job transfer and Mom says the neighborhood has turned against us or whatever." She rolled her eyes in typical teenage fashion. 3 months later, Karen's family was gone and a new family moved in. They introduced themselves properly, asked about boundaries respectfully, and even purchased plants from my nursery for their new garden. We've since become good friends. As for me, I used some of the settlement money to install security cameras and proper fencing around my property. The irrigation system works perfectly now, and my business has grown steadily. Last weekend, I hosted a neighborhood plant exchange in my front yard. Properly permitted, of course. Everyone from the surrounding homes came, bringing cuttings and seedlings to trade. We shared gardening tips, food, and stories, including, inevitably, the tale of the infamous birthday party parking disaster. The new owners of Karen's house laughed the hardest. We wondered why the realtor emphasized the ample street parking so much when showing us the house. Sometimes I think about how differently things could have turned out if I'd just exploded in anger or let Karen intimidate me into dropping the issue. Instead, I chose to be strategic and stand my ground respectfully but firmly. The field has recovered completely now. In fact, it's more productive than ever, kind of like my relationship with the neighborhood. Standing up for yourself doesn't have to mean burning bridges. Sometimes it means building better ones, with clearer boundaries and mutual respect. And occasionally it means watching entitled people learn the hard way that actions have consequences. The next one is a malicious compliances story. I worked as a night supervisor in a small private psychiatric hospital years ago. Department directors of individual patient units were on site from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, so there was a bit of overlap in supervisory responsibilities between 3 p.m. and 5 p.m. The director of the high-security acute care unit did not care for me as a supervisor, nor as a human being. She made it very clear that she was in charge until 5 p.m., not sooner. At every chance encounter, she had some snide accusation or remark to make about night shift, whether real, perceived, or imagined. Nothing I ever did was correct or good enough in her mind. One day, the evening supervisor traded shifts with me so she could attend her granddaughter's school play that afternoon. On that day, I received oncoming report from the nursing director, including ongoing construction progress as the facility upgraded its appearance. About 1 hour into the shift, I had completed oncoming rounds on the second floor and had just arrived on the first floor when a fire alarm sounded. The hospital operator announced a code red on the second floor south wing, opposite and 1 floor removed from the acute care unit. It was later discovered the construction workers accidentally set off the alarm. Nobody was to evacuate their area unless in imminent danger, told to do so by a supervisor or ordered by a member of the fire department. At night, everybody was in their beds, so all staff had to do was a head count and shut all doors. During daylight hours, patients were up walking around the halls in group therapy sessions or with individual counselors. I instructed the charge nurse to gather all the patients and staff into a large day room, complete the head count, and remain there until the all clear was announced on the intercom. As I started to leave, the unit director entered and demanded to know why all the patients weren't lined up at the door. Stupid sleep-deprived me didn't understand this was a rhetorical question. I started to explain that this was the safest way to keep track of this population, and they were in no immediate danger. She didn't wait for an answer. She started yelling for everyone to line up at the back door and leave the building. Just then, 2 firefighters arrived and asked me where the exit was to the outside courtyard. I pointed down the hallway to where the director stood with 25 confused patients and staff in front of the exit. The lieutenant got about halfway to the exit, stopped, and looked at me and asked, "What the hell are all these people doing blocking the fire exit? Who's in charge here?" I walked up to him, pointed at the director, and said, "She is." I immediately turned to walk off the unit, listening to the lieutenant loudly telling her, "They should be in a room with the doors closed, not blocking an exit. We need to get outside and you put these people directly in our way. The alarm location isn't anywhere near here. You have multiple barriers and firewalls that must be breached before you must leave, etc., etc." At the next all-management meeting, the hospital administrator announced that in the future, directors will stick to managing their individual department issues. Shift supervisors were to remain in charge of global hospital operations, including managing emergency evacuation of patients during fires and other building threats. The director never spoke to me again. Win-win. The next one is a pro-revenge story. Preface. In early 2020, I was hired under the title Assistant Manager at a local automotive shop. We mainly sold tires if you're American, and alloy wheels for passenger vehicles. The company owned several stores. I reported directly to my manager, who then reported to the owner of the company. Shortly after I was hired, I noticed the behavior of the manager was far from professional. He would constantly mock and berate me for being the new guy. I believe part of this was jealousy and insecurity on his part. As I ended up recording more sales under my name within the first few months, he would also knock off work early and start drinking beer whilst the rest of us continued to work. I remember when he found out that I participated in MMA training sessions after work, he tried to goad me into a fight for his own amusement. Clearly, this guy didn't like me, and I was starting to get the feeling that he was trying to get me to snap or lose my cool, and as a result, my employment. I became even more certain of that with what happened next. Story. During the few months that I had worked there, I had noticed that our takings for the day and sales records did not match. I would often spend half an hour to an hour after work trying to figure out where the errors were coming from, whilst the manager would simply throw his hands in the air and exclaim that he had no idea how this was happening. The recurring issue seemed to be that our cash takings had been recorded incorrectly. There would sometimes be an excess amount of cash that didn't match up to what was recorded on our sales invoicing software. Other times, there would be less. I was, at the time, an accounting student studying towards my bachelor's degree. I was already suspicious of the cash being out each day. However, given how the manager had been treating me up until this point, I was concerned that any complaint would somehow be twisted and used against me. And boy, was I right. Several weeks later, my manager took some time off. During this time, I managed a personal record in store sales and also noticed something interesting. The cash was never out at the end of each shift. I reported this directly to the owner of the company. Given I was acting manager during the time my manager was away, I was expected to report to the owner every day, and explained what had been occurring whilst the manager was there. In all honesty, I was hopeful that the owner would be having a word with the manager about the discrepancies. However, I was also weary, as I believed once the owner spoke to my manager, that the manager will immediately know it was me who reported this. When the manager returned to work, he immediately approached me with a disgruntled look on his face. "I've spoken with the owner. You tried to blame me for the discrepancies? You should focus on doing your job properly, then this wouldn't happen." I was quite taken aback by how angry he was, though I wasn't surprised that he twisted it and tried to place blame on me. Given his reaction, I'm even more suspicious at this point. He wants me to do my job properly, eh? Malicious compliance ensues. That same week I got to work. I started paying attention to what customers were paying when they were dealing with my manager. Behind his back, I began examining all of his sale transactions and invoices with a fine comb. As the days rolled by, I started to find evidence of his dishonesty. When it came to a few cash sales, my manager was doing the following. Example 1. Would tell the customer the price is $200 if he pays cash. 2. Would discount the price by $50 in the sale invoicing software. 3. Would put the extra cash into the till and record a $150 cash sale. 4. Before we did the cash up at the end of the day, he would sneakily pocket this extra cash whilst no one was around. Though he was very foolish, as he clearly couldn't remember the exact amount he had swindled. Hence, why the cash would be up some days, didn't swindle enough, or the cash would be down, swindled too much. And I took scene shots of the discounts he had been giving on sales and sent them to the business owner, along with a report. A report with a detailed description of my findings. The report also showed that on all days he wasn't there for the cash count, there was no variance. When he was there, well, the owner was infuriated. This man had been his trusted employee for years. The owner was so infuriated, in fact, that he ordered my manager do a mandatory drug test, pee in a cup style, on the same day he found out. And no surprises, he failed. Turns out the manager had quite the meth habit. This was most likely his sole motive for stealing cash, and the owner was beside himself. We operate machinery every day in this store, and so the thought of a manager walking around high as a kite wouldn't sit well with any health and safety professional. In fact, it could have landed the owner in serious legal trouble if any accident or injury occurred under this manager's watch. The manager was terminated immediately for violation of his contract and was later taken to court by the owner in an attempt to recover the stolen funds. Safe to say, I was promoted to store manager position shortly after his termination. The next one is an entitled People story. My sister was evicted from the family property in late 2023. That year, and the year after, she kept my nephews away during my birthday just because she wanted to spite our parents. And just to be clear, my birthday is in May, so it was long before she got her eviction notice. My birthday that year, we were preparing to have lots of pizza and other stuff for my nephews to enjoy, and then we found out last minute that my sister was taking them elsewhere that day. A few weeks earlier, my sister and mother got in a fight. Can't remember about what. But it might have been because my sister was taking advantage of me by not paying her half of the power bills we shared. My mother fought with her about that several times. My sister still owes me $800 in unpaid power bills, and if you look at my other posts about my sister, you can see what kind of terrible person she is, so no surprise, she's also a creature of spite. It was only days before my 2023 birthday that we found out my sister was taking her kids out, and she took them to a certain popular family fun restaurant with games for both kids and adults, just so they'd have much more fun on that day than hanging out with me. My birthday ended up awkwardly just being my parents and I just sitting at a table with gifts, pizza, and cake. Everyone in the family was upset when they found out, and my sister, she didn't care. She did it all to spite our parents, and especially our mother. The following year, she pretty much did the same thing, but worse, by forbidding my nephews to come over to visit, and kept them in a hot and cramped apartment she was sharing with a friend. When my nephews realized why she did it the first time around, they were kinda torn, because on one hand, they missed my birthday, but on the other, they got a great day out partying with their mother. The second time around, they were genuinely angry with her, especially my middle nephew, and he let her have it for doing that. After keeping my nephews away the first time, my sister noticed I wasn't happy with her for what she did, so she told she was going to take me out to celebrate another day to make up for it. She even promised. Guess what? That never happened. Every one of her birthdays, right up to 2023, we took her out on our dimes to celebrate. Her birthday 2022, we took her to a fancy steakhouse, and she loved it. Other years, we took her to a gourmet pizza restaurant she also loved. Even her 2024 birthday, after I'd gone NC with her, our parents still took her out to celebrate. But no, she could not be that kind on other people's birthdays. Except her POS boyfriend that died in 2023 in an accident. In 2022, she convinced me to drive all the way to the coast to celebrate his birthday at a restaurant chain we actually have locally. I had to drive home over 100 miles in the middle of the night. I have never known the same level of courtesy from my sister that I gave to her on just about anything. She tormented me when we were kids, and as an adult, she's an entitled, narcissistic hypocrite. The one time she took me out for my birthday, it was to a place for kids. I ended up pretending to have a good time and spent a bunch of my own money on the claw machine games. The go-karts they had there were not only slow, but everybody else laughed at and drove past me because I was the heaviest person in the group by about 50 pounds, and the carts were so underpowered that they just slowed to a crawl, no matter which one I drove. And then when it was time to leave, my sister sent me into the big tube structure to get my nephews because they wouldn't come out. I was the second tallest person there and the heaviest. And none of them could have gone in there? And all three of my nephews had rancid gas and farted up that place to the point my eyes were watering. Imagine crawling through a tube that smells like rotten eggs. They kept moving around, and I had to hunt them down one by one and make them get out and go to their mom. And then, it turns out I lost my cell phone in there, and I only noticed after we left. We had to go back to get it, and I had to crawl right back into that eye-watering stank, only to find it wasn't even in there, and had somehow fell outside below the place. My sister openly found the whole situation hilarious for years. She'd laugh at me if I had to crawl through a sewer. My sister didn't finally get an inkling how bad she'd effed up until after my birthday in 2024 when she openly forbid my nephews from coming to visit because my middle nephew went off on her about it. And he apologized to me on the day I went to pick up my eldest nephew to take him to his junior prom. My sister also walked up to my window with her old, "please feel sorry for me" face and said, "I'm sorry I kept the boys away on your birthday." I barely responded to her, and when she realized she was not getting sympathy from me, she trudged off. She gets her sons 1 to 2 weekends a month, and the day of my eldest nephew's junior prom just happened to fall on a day she had him. But I'll save that story for another post. Thankfully, my sister did not have the decision-making power she thought she did. She tried to outright forbid my nephews from visiting, but her ex has majority custody and he lets them come visit. And recently, we visited him. We get along with him so well, and he's a great dad. When my sister found out my nephews were visiting, she had a tantrum. but now she seems resigned to the fact she can't do anything about it. Edit. For those who think this sounds too one-sided, read my other posts about my sister, so see how toxic she really is. The next one is an entitled parent story. So, I, 18F, have a very fluffy, very adorable cat named Mochi. He's basically my little buddy, and he's got one of those Instagram accounts where I post his funny antics, so a lot of people in my neighborhood know about him, including this one mom I'll call EM, who has a 6-year-old daughter super into cats. No biggie, right? One day, EM messages me on Instagram saying her daughter is absolutely obsessed with Mochi and asking if I could bring him to her daughter's birthday party the following weekend so the kids can play with him. I politely decline, explaining that Mochi doesn't do well in new environments and would likely hide or freak out around loud kids. EM's response? Well, can you loan him to us for the day? Yes, she literally wanted me to just hand over my cat as if he were a library book or something. She promised they'd take good care of him, and even offered to pay me $20 for the inconvenience. I politely refuse again, saying that Mochi isn't up for loan, and I don't think it would be safe or comfortable for him. EM immediately switches tactics, calling me selfish and accusing me of gatekeeping joy from her daughter. She rants about how it's just one day, and I owe it to the community because I flaunt Mochi's photos online. Now I'm getting irritated. I tell her that my cat isn't an accessory, and he's definitely not something I owe to the neighborhood. I assume that's the end of it, until the day of the party. I'm in my apartment when I hear a loud knock at my door. It's EM and her daughter, with the girl holding a sparkly cat carrier. EM smiles and says, "Oh, we came to pick up Mochi!" She acts as if we had agreed on this and just expected me to hand him over on demand. Completely stunned, I tell her, "I never agreed to this, and I'm not giving you my cat." EM's smile drops instantly, and she launches into this loud, dramatic rant about how I'm ruining her daughter's special day, and that I shouldn't show off my cat if I don't want to share. Her daughter starts tearing up, and EM gives me this accusing look, like I've just broken her kid's heart on purpose. My neighbor down the hall actually poked her head out to see what was going on, which was enough for EM to grab her daughter and storm off, yelling, "I'll make sure everyone knows how selfish you are." Later, I found out from mutual friends that she spread a story around the neighborhood that I baited her daughter with Mochi, only to withhold him out of spite. No one really believed her, but she still gives me the dirtiest looks anytime I pass her. Mochi, completely oblivious and unbothered, living his best life as usual. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.